welcome everyone to this edition of 7 Minute Takes. This is your host, Jason Malcolm Stewart. Want to thank everyone again for joining us as we sit down to record this episode very late Thursday night, almost Friday morning, on into the 15th. And we have two very kind of offbeat, noirish genre films to look at. Actually, somewhat similarly themed movies from Samuel Goldwyn. We have Hostile Border, and from our friends at IFC, we have Sacrifice. But before we jump into our two films that we're going to present our takes on, I just want to again offer a very sincere thanks to all the folks around the world who have been tuning in to us since we started this YouTube feature. We have just broken the 1,000-view barrier, 1,000 views and counting. And again, want to specifically thank some of the people who have been viewing our videos in such places as Malaysia and Japan, the Philippines, and our southern neighbors in Mexico. We say to all of you, thank you very much. It's very gratifying, very rewarding to know that people are taking an interest in what we do. Most especially have been just very, very surprised by the response to the episode that ran just about a month ago on the film Intruders and the Corpse of Anna Fritz. Really have just seen a huge amount of eyeballs on that particular episode. Again, we appreciate the interest. We appreciate those who have taken the plunge with us and have subscribed to our page as a regular feature. We hope to hear from you both on the YouTube page and on the Age of the Nerd site. We're very excited that you've made us a regular part of your viewing pleasure on YouTube, and we hope we continue to deliver, and we'd love to hear from you. If there's anything that we can particularly focus on or cover, if you have any suggestions about films that we should sit down and review, again, we'd love to hear from you. Well, on to our offerings for this evening. Again, we have two films to consider, and it's interesting that, again, we are getting some viewership in the land of Mexico, because that's where our first film takes its principal locations from. Our first film, Hostile Border, comes from Samuel Goldwyn Films, and it is a film that already has kind of made the rounds a little bit, and it won the Audience Award for Best Narrative Feature at the 2015 LA Film Fest. And from the presser, this is a Michael Dwyer film. Michael Dwyer is the co-director of this particular feature. He is the, as we'll call him, the main seat director. It also was co-directed and co-written by Caitlin McLaughlin, and Dwyer and McLaughlin's film, Hostile Border. The synopsis is as so. Raised in the U.S., Claudia, Veronica Sixtos, is an undocumented immigrant living beyond her means in a twisted version of the American dream. When she's arrested by the FBI for credit card fraud, Claudia is quickly deported to Mexico. Speaking no Spanish, and lost in her foreign homeland, she reluctantly takes refuge at her estranged father's cattle ranch, Roberto Urbina. As she clashes with her unyielding father, her attempts to return home to the U.S. thrust her into a dangerous bond with a foreign smuggler, Ricky, Julio Cesar Cedillo, I believe. Caught between her father's sermons, Ricky's promises, and the encroaching military, Claudia must navigate a tightrope of impossible choices. Both a slow-burning crime thriller and a western, Hostile Border follows the transformative journey of a young woman confronting the high price of American ideals in the dark places between two cultures. And again, this is coming to us from Samuel Goldwyn Films. The release date for the film will be on Friday, April 15th, this coming Friday, in a limited release in selected markets in Los Angeles, in Denver, San Diego, Chicago, Phoenix, Pasadena, and Tucson, and also will be available on the 16th, viewer on demand, on cable, and all digital platforms. And again, this film has already been making the film festival route and has had some appreciable buzz. And as for our take, I would say that this is a film that is worth 7 minutes of your time. Hostile Border, as a film, borrows quite a bit in theme from films like Denis Villeneuve's Sicario. If you saw Sicario with Emily Blunt and Benicio del Toro, you'll find a lot of common ground between those films, though Sicario, of course, leaned a little heavily on the fish out of water aspect for Emily Blunt as the Anglo American agent kind of over her head, and a Latin American crime-infested scenario. This takes actually the opposite spin on that, in the sense that Miss Sixtos' character, Claudia, is a Mexican national who has lived in the United States illegally since she was a young person, and is someone who has no Spanish language skills. She's here illegally, but when she runs afoul of the law, she gets deported to a place where she has no particular ties, doesn't particularly speak the language, and doesn't particularly have any knowledge about the customs of the place where she's going, which is to go stay with her estranged father, who owns a ranchero out in what it stands in to look like the Sinaloa desert area, but given some of the release schedule dates, I think the principal photography for this was probably done in Arizona. Regardless, that same fish out of water, over your head, kind of stuck stranger in a strange land aspect of the films is very similar to Sicario. In fact, the film, and this is not a spoilerific discussion here, but the film itself starts off with the discussion of the Spanish slang term pocha, which is applied to the main character very liberally. If you're not familiar with the term, it refers to a person who has Mexican heritage, but who does not speak Spanish and is not familiar with the customs of people who come from Mexico. And so this actually kind of becomes her nickname, as she is stuck in Mexico and trying to find a way back to the United States. And so it's an interesting setup premise. Of course, she's a bit of a slippery character, and she soon gets herself involved with a slippery character, another American expat who is in Mexico to work for one of the cartels. And so they kind of strike a devil's bargain. But along the way, she's kind of forced to make some hard choices, because her father is a very straight shooter, a very old school, by the bootstraps type of individual. And so her dealings with this guy who's working for the cartel and her father have a lot to do with how the story develops and some of the decisions that she has to make. I will say this is a beautifully shot film. If you're a fan of the John Huston style of Western, if you are just the kind of person who appreciates that kind of vast, sweeping landscape vista of the American and shall we say also to the North American Southwest, not just in the United States but also in Mexico, you'll be very pleased with the scenery and the kind of outstretch of this film. The principal photography is wonderful. The story is pretty decently constructed thriller. Again, it shares a lot of the shall we say a lot of the principal take on modern Mexico that Sicario does. And I joked with my good friend and my sometimes cameraman Dave Sanchez that Sicario had to come from the Bureau of Tourism as interpreted by the Donald Trump campaign. It doesn't necessarily give a flattering view of the landscape of what's occurring in Mexico, and of course this is a crime thriller, so it's not necessarily out of bounds for them to look at the seedier side of what's going on. It probably does give a little bit of a more even-handed take than Sicario does on the issues that are going on with drug trafficking and the battle back and forth between law enforcement and the criminals, and whether or not there really is a fine line between who's a criminal and who's a cop in the kind of outlaw atmosphere of the border. Again, the term hostile border is a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't necessarily take place right along the American-Mexican border, but it does capture quite a bit of the aspect of the push and pull of what's going on in terms of these sorts of things, and of course the immigrant experience kind of flipped on its head, where Veronica Sixtos's character is the stranger in a strange land, despite being a person who is of Mexican heritage and has family and ties there. She knows nothing about the place, nothing about the times and cultures of the people who are living there, doesn't speak the language. And that was maybe one of the only flaws I found with the film, is that she seems to the point of almost incredulity, just completely uninterested in learning anything about her environment, even things that would be helpful for her. She takes the pocha persona about as far as it can go. Again, part of the theme of the movie, but I thought maybe perhaps a pinch overdone. But overall, I would say Hostile Border is a good spending time of 83 minutes. If you have a chance to check this one out, view on demand on a Netflix night, I would give it a strong take on our end for photography, for setting up of the plot, for the performances, perhaps a slight ding for some of the character development. But overall, I would say this is a three Vader film, and worth your time to sit down and to have a take on. Our next film is actually a very similarly themed type of thriller. Once again, this involves a primary female protagonist who is a stranger in a strange land. Sacrifice will open on Friday, April 29th in New York at the IFC Center, and will be available on demand in that time frame, again, VOD, on all your major platforms. This is a Peter A. Dowling film, and from the presser, disturbing secrets lie buried in the bogs of a remote island in the spellbinding thriller. Shortly after surgeon Tora Hamilton, Rahata Mitchell, moves with her husband, Rupert Graves, yes, that Rupert Graves, to the Shetland Islands, 100 miles off the coast of Scotland. She makes an unnerving discovery. The body of a young woman with strange symbols carved into her flesh and her heart ripped out. When what at first appears to be the remains of a victim from an ancient ritual turns out to be a fresh corpse, Tora is plunged into the dangerous mystery that may be connected to the dark myths of the island's folklore. Again, this film stars Rahada Mitchell from Man on Fire, Melinda and Melinda, Surrogates, and The Frozen Ground, and yes, Rupert Graves, much beloved from that wonderful classic, The Madness of King George, also from V for Vendetta, and Made in Dagenham, and written and directed by Peter A. Dowling. And as the presser tells us, this film takes place in the Shetland Islands, an opposing pole from our other film, but very similarly themed, about an American doctor who, after a tragic occurrence in her life, moves to the Shetland Islands and gets embroiled in this mystery, which was very cleverly constructed. Actually was, I believe, based on a very similarly themed real-life case in terms of the MacGuffin of this piece, which we read about a little earlier. And again, forgive me for using a literary term to discuss the kind of plot thread of this body that's found. And at first it appears to be one of ancient vintage, but then because of certain scientific irregularities, it is discovered the body is not an ancient body, despite the fact that it appears to be mummified and has within its body imprinted very strange, what appear to be very strange Nordic runes. Anyway, a very cleverly set up premise, one that delves deeply into ancient Scottish and Norse history and folklore, and puts a very interesting spin on some of the discussion of what's called in other parts of the British Isles, the fairy folk. These folks make an appearance, but maybe not in the way you think. And it definitely is a different spin on the idea of the fair folk or the fairy, and the type of activities that these interesting people might do, and what it might mean in the real world if there were people who practiced such kind of ritual magic actions as is described in this particular movie. Anyway, again, a very interestingly set up premise, fairly solidly acted. You'll see some actual bits of the British movie industry in the film. Very solidly shot and paced. Interesting turns and twists. There were some that I must admit were pretty predictable, especially as our protagonist, Rahada Mitchell's Dr. Hamilton, starts to realize that this particular murder plot is perhaps the principal reason for this little town to exist. It is that children from the corn moment that she kind of realizes that almost everybody is in on this particular plot about this strange death, and it does almost get you to the point where you expect somebody to come out of the crowd and scream Malachi. But that aside, this is a very inventive premise. I can't say enough about how this is set up, and again, it does some interesting things with the trope. It takes you down some of the familiar pathways of, again, the fish out of water, the stranger in the strange land, But where you end up is a little different. I had to quibble a little bit with the last scene, but I think getting to that last scene is well worth 7 minutes of your time. I think very astute fans will see some of the homage that is clearly paid to the Hammer film's version of the Wicker Man, the one with Christopher Lee, not the one that Nick Cage did. No offense, Nick, we love you, and your version of the Wicker Man actually has some things to recommend it. But no, this is more like the traditional version of the Wicker Man. You'll see a lot of things that kind of call back that original 70s version of the film. Things that I think will be well appreciated by long-term genre fans. And so, in terms of Sacrifice, again coming from IFC, and again will be out in limited release on April 29th and on demand over all the platforms. Again, I would give this a very solid 7-minute take. It is worth 7 minutes of your time. This also, too, is a 3 Vader film, I guess, very appropriate for a day where the Rogue One teaser trailer came out, though that actually did not feature Darth Vader. One of the burning questions of that trailer was whether or not Vader was going to make an appearance. He did not, but it's a very solid 3 Vader film. Very happy to see IFC has steadied the ship based upon some of their last year performance. Very glad to see that 2016 is looking much brighter than 2015 did for this indie horror powerhouse. Well, before I digress too far, I would be amiss if I did not give some discussion to the season 6 finale of one of America's most popular genre TV shows, The Walking Dead. As probably everyone far and wide has heard, season 6 ended with our intrepid gang being captured by the survivors and encountering the well-regarded character from the comic version of The Walking Dead for the first time, Negan. Negan to be played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And, of course, the season ends on a cliffhanger, which has been long discussed and dissected, with Negan deciding to make an example of one of the members of Rick's squad by beating them to death with a barbed wire tipped Lucille. Now, in the comic version, this is the final bow for Glenn. Glenn meets his grisly end at the end of Negan's bat. However, the season 6 episode cliffhanger left in question who exactly got the working end of the bat, as we see Negan go to work on somebody, but we don't see who that somebody is. In fact, we see the death of the person from the POV of the victim. And so we have to wait till the beginning of season 7 to discover who dies on the television version, which, my friends, explains about the progress of America's beloved show, The Walking Dead, more than anything perhaps that I could say in terms of an editorial critique, is that the show has gotten to this point where you really only need to watch about 3 episodes a year to understand what has happened in the whole year. I must admit, I'm just always flabbergasted by how much the show continues to captivate the imagination of fans, especially, I guess, those who have some association with the book. though it has deviated in large ways from the book version. Because simply put, the last 3 seasons of the show, I will admit to me, have been very, very drawn out and colossal holding pattern exercises. I will admit, I have not watched a full season first run of the show since, I want to say, season 4. When did the governor die? Was that season 4 now? Might have been season 3. The first full season with Michonne and the season where the governor was finally killed off. I think that's season 4. The season where the first itineration of the newbies came and went. Guys like T-Dog and Herschel and whoever else got basically written out. Anyway, I digress on my digression. The greatest problem for the show for me in recent years is it just seems that the show takes too long to go anywhere. Now, that might be the pot calling the kettle something, but I will say I believe they were running 16 or 18 episode seasons. Of those 16 or 18 episodes, really only about 4 or 5 of them actually have any consistent plot development. Usually the first episode of the season, usually the second to last episode before the mid-season finale, the mid-season finale, and then the season finale. Those tend to be the only shows that have actually anything happening. And so in the last few years, I basically watched those 4 shows, and I pretty much know what happened that season on The Walking Dead. This season was no different. And it started with all kinds of misdirection stuff. Glenn was eaten, Glenn wasn't eaten. In one of the great bait-and-switch moments of recent television history, people wander off, Maggie's having the baby, the sort of stuff. It just, so much of it is time fill. Because of the way the show is structured, they have to produce their episode number a year, yet they are waiting, of course, for very specific seasons of the year during higher sweep periods to have anything happen. And so you get about 4 episodes where the actual plot progresses. The rest of the time they're driving around somewhere, they're lamenting about something that they can't change, or they are commiserating with whoever they're shacking up with, and I mean that in the sense that they seem to always find a place to flop at some point in the episode, at some point in the series, with people who either mean them no good or who are just too ineffectual to fight the walkers. Very happy to see Jeffrey Dean Morgan, an excellent actor, take this on. As has been noted, there's now a interesting tie between, a linkage, I should say, rather than tie, between Walking Dead and Batman versus Superman, as Morgan and the actress who plays Maggie on the show ended up being Bruce Wayne's parents in Batman versus Superman. Of course, the furor over that, Laura Cohan being the actress who portrays Maggie. I'm sorry for my slow on the uptake moment there. It was actually nice to see both of them all cleaned up and looking dapper before they got a 45 to the head in Batman versus Superman. And of course, the controversy about that rages on worldwide. There has still been some discussion that Zack Snyder may be somehow diminished or reduced, despite the fact that Justice League Part 1 is scheduled to start shooting, I believe, sometime this week upcoming. Principal photography begins on the movie. There's a lot of talk that Ben Affleck may be getting some greater hand in the film. We'll have to see how that plays out. I'm very disappointed to see how this Firestorm, as if you recall our previous edition of 7-Minute Takes, I think a lot of the distaste for the movie was manufactured. And so it appears that the powers that be, namely capital cities and Disney, have managed to turn a significant aspect of the movie-going public away from seeing the film. I think hardcore fans went to see the thing in the first 2 or 3 days, given the spectacular opening box office for the film. But then the average fan, scared off by all the negative discussion, some of it over the top, did not go see the film. And so now we have what's going to be most likely the first billion-dollar flop. And I say billion with a B. And if you can't wrap your head about how a film that makes $1 billion is going to be considered to be unsuccessful, well, sadly, my friend, Batman vs. Superman is going to be the case study for this film. The film is almost certain to make $1 billion before the end of next month. I do believe it has not debuted in China. I can't remember now if that's the case or not. But regardless, it will make its money in certain markets, but still be considered unsuccessful because some people thought it was too plot-heavy or whatever the strange, somewhat manufactured criticisms of the film were. Not that there weren't legitimate problems with the film, not that there weren't things that could have been improved upon, but simply put, that film got a lot more rigorous criticism than many of these films have. And again, I think that has to do with the fact that Disney doesn't want anyone playing in this pool with them. So they've made their point. They've shown that they exert a lot of power in the modern movie-going marketplace through review sites and certain critical movie review sites that are controlled by them and certain outlets that are controlled by them. They've proven they can put the hammer down. I really hope that this does not bode badly for Civil War, which I think looks like a good film, looks like a film I think that'll be very enjoyable. I think that the Russo brothers are going to deliver here. I think the film will do fine at the box office. I just think that if they're going to throw that gauntlet down, trust me, what goes around comes around. And next year, Marvel has some films that they are not as certain are going to be tentpole films. Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange, Black Panther, certain other films are going to be very vulnerable. I think, frankly, the next upcoming Avengers films are vulnerable. Thor 3 is vulnerable in terms of this directed, again, paid-for criticism. Time Warner ain't exactly the sisters of the poor either. And so if they're going to play this game, if it's going to be, we're going to basically enforce amongst our media channels a certain opinion or a certain take, no pun intended, then I hope they're ready to play that game, because I think the knives are going to be drawn for their films upcoming. I think anything that doesn't have Robert Downey Jr. in it is going to be fair game for evisceration by those people who work for the Warner, Time Warner side of the media. And that's not a game I think fandom should want to play, but we'll see how that works out. Well, appreciate everyone tuning in to this edition of 7 Minute Takes. We'll be back next week with a new take. We have some upcoming films in the pipeline that we're going to look at. Fear Incorporated is in the mix, as well as Shazero Diabolico is on its way soon as well. We have a number of upcoming specialty features that we're hoping to sit down. Please do check out on the channel. We have a number of live coverage videos from our tour around the various cons of last month. A number of cons came through the area, number of cons coming. We had Silicon Valley Comic-Con. We're going to have San Francisco Comic-Con, as well as the good old reliable San Diego Comic-Con, which is going to feature a lot of on-site coverage from Age of the Nerd this year. And we hope that you'll have a chance to check all of it out. Once again, keep following us on Age of the Nerd. Keep checking us out here on YouTube on this page. Follow us on Twitter. I have been neglecting to mention my personal Twitter handle is Sabbath Soldier, at Sabbath Soldier on Twitter. So feel free to follow me there for updates, news about Age of the Nerd, as well as many of my other activities, both in terms of journalism and my fiction and nonfiction writing. Once again, at Age of the Nerd is the group Twitter handle, and at Sabbath Soldier, Sabbath as in the last day of the week, Saturday, Sabbath Soldier is my Twitter handle. Would love to hook up with people on Twitter. Would love to talk to you here on the YouTube page. Would love to talk to you at Age of the Nerd. So keep checking us out. Keep hopefully making us a part of what you guys do in terms of learning about everything pop culture. And hopefully as we go forward, we'll be able to bring you even more and more coverage that floats your boat. Once again, I'm your host, Jason Stewart. Appreciate you taking the time, and I will catch you on the flip side.